For 77 years, the truth about Admiral Richard E. Byrd's Antarctic expeditions lay frozen, locked away in military archives and in the mind of one man. Now, before his death, the last survivor has spoken. What he revealed is more than history. It's a secret that could rewrite everything we know about Earth. Why was Operation High Jump armed like an invasion? What vanished team was never recorded in official logs? And what did Admiral Byrd himself admit to seeing beneath the ice? We'll uncover what Robert Johnson took nearly 8 decades to say, and why governments wanted it buried. The making of a legend, Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd Jr. was not just another name in the annals of exploration. He was a man whose very life seemed pulled from the pages of an epic adventure novel. Born in 1888 into a prominent Virginia family, Byrd was destined for a life of distinction. From the moment he joined the U.S. Navy, his career was marked by daring feats and a relentless drive to be the first at everything. His peers respected him, his superiors trusted him, and the public adored him. With piercing blue eyes and a charisma that made headlines, Byrd was more than an officer. He was a living symbol of American ambition. Byrd's reputation was cemented early on with a series of bold aerial achievements. In 1926, he claimed to be the first person to fly over the North Pole, an accomplishment that made him a household name and earned him the Congressional Medal of Honor. He followed that with record-breaking flights across the Atlantic and to the South Pole, becoming the first to navigate the planet's most inhospitable frontiers from the sky. New York City gave him not one, but 3 ticker-tape parades in his honor, an honor few could dream of, let alone achieve. That craving for exploration was more than glory quests. Every one of those voyages would become, for Byrd, a challenge involving human limits and another opportunity to go where no man has gone before. While others regarded the frozen poles as deserted wastelands, Byrd viewed them as blank pages awaiting the ink and brush of history to fill them in. This desire to chart the uncharted would bring him back to Antarctica over and over again, to ever bolder and more secret missions. Byrd's first expedition to Antarctica, in 1928, was one of stupendous success. The team set up the little American base along the Ross Ice Shelf, had done extensive aerial mapping, and with some flavor touched upon the huge, untouched potential of the continent. His next major expedition to Antarctica was in 1933, which literally went a step bolder when he decided to spend 5 months alone in a remote meteorological station, cut off from the harshest conditions on Earth, temperatures far below zero, and almost lost his own life due to carbon monoxide poisoning. This brush with death hasn't slowed him. Rather, it sharpened his resolve. But underneath all that brave explorer kind of bravado, one individual was aware that some discoveries were far too great or far too dangerous to be made known to the world. Whispers had begun presenting themselves in naval circles by the later part of the 30s that Byrd's Antarctic trips were not merely for the purpose of mapping ice and studying weather. There seemed to be strange formations of navigation anomalies and geological wonders that simply could not have any sane explanation. None of these made it into official press releases, but they were intriguing enough to draw in the U.S. government. It was in 1939, just before another Antarctic undertaking, that Lieutenant Byrd met 19-year-old Robert Johnson. Johnson, a Sea Scout from San Diego, thought that he was offering his services for what would be a simple scientific expedition. The meeting was being held at a naval facility in Norfolk, Virginia. Johnson had expected questions about his sailing experience or technical knowledge. Byrd took one look at him and started asking strange questions. Could he keep a secret? Was he absolutely loyal to the United States? In that dimly lit room, Johnson sensed that something more was going on than just the usual trip to Antarctica. Byrd needed no noisy adventurers. He needed quiet, reliable men who would follow orders and never talk of what they saw. Johnson's calmness and self-possession distinguished him as different from other volunteers, most of whom boasted about their past glories. Without a show, Byrd picked him out of the group. What Johnson did not know was that he had crossed onto the path that would tie him to one of the most mysterious expeditions of all time. He would witness events he would never be able to divulge for nearly 80 years. At that time, he was just a young man honored to work alongside a living history, but soon would find that glory and discovery were only part of the tale in Antarctica. Johnson didn't yet know it, but his loyalty would make him a witness to events no history book would dare print. The frozen chessboard to most people in the 1940s, Antarctica was little more than a blank spot at the bottom of the map, an endless sheet of white, home only to penguins, seals, and howling winds. But to world powers teetering on the edge of the Cold War, it was something else entirely, a colossal chessboard where the stakes weren't just land, but global dominance. Beneath that ice, scientists suspected, were vast mineral deposits, coal, oil, even uranium, that could power nations for centuries. Whoever controlled Antarctica wouldn't just hold bragging rights. They could hold the keys to the future. By the time Robert Johnson set foot there with Admiral Byrd, Antarctica had become a silent prize in an undeclared race. It was larger than the United States and Mexico combined, with no government, no borders, and no legal claims recognized by the world. The great powers knew this could change overnight. All it would take was a permanent base, a flag in the snow, and a few months of occupation to tilt the balance of power. The public image of Antarctic exploration was clean, almost romantic, brave men braving the cold for the sake of science. Newspapers printed photos of grinning sailors beside penguins, or pilots posing in front of their ski-equipped planes. But behind that propaganda was a very different reality. Nations weren't just measuring wind speeds. They were mapping potential runways, scouting supply routes, and quietly marking areas rich in resources. Johnson would later remember how, even in those early days, the Antarctic landscape was stubborn beyond bounds. Compasses spun in lazy circles, failing to point north. Radio signals sometimes vanished into static before coming back, as though nothing had happened. The ice itself was eerie. In some places, it was not quite pure white, streaked very lightly and shimmers like a pearl catching light, and it sometimes looked as if it glowed from the inside. Such would be pretty susceptible to scientific explanation: magnetic interference, atmospheric effects. But the other ones, as Johnson insisted, defied explanation. One flight was characterized by the aurora australis, the southern lights, spiriting its patterns almost as if deliberately, as they contorted shapes that would last far longer than any light could within natural bounds. Old guys who had spent too long out in the field would mutter sometimes that the lights were watching them. That was the kind of talk that officers discouraged yet never quite managed to stamp out. Byrd himself would rarely comment on such peculiarities, at least not in public, but Johnson noted how sharply the admiral paid attention whenever such oddities were reported. More than once, Byrd discreetly altered a flight plan or directed a ground crew to survey the area for unusual readings. These diversions were never explained, and the official logs would sometimes differ from what the men recalled doing. The terrain added to their sense of discomfort. Standing out as jagged teeth from the flat ice, Antarctica's mountains found their birth from naked rock, almost black, threatening to cut into the white skyline. Some slopes were utterly devoid of snow, revealing dark stone even at temperatures well below freezing. There were murmurings, according to Johnson, that the exposed areas were, in fact, not entirely natural and had been formed by something from beneath the ice pushing upward. One day, Johnson was on a supply trip. Somewhere he saw something that would stay with him for decades, a huge crack in the ice, too deep to even see the bottom. Warm air, gushing out, curled in pale mist into a bitter cold. He stood at the edge, feeling the faintest vibration, almost like the hum of distant machinery. Nothing in his training had prepared him for that. But little did he know that these bizarre readings and strange geological peculiarities and unexplained phenomena were all quietly recorded, classified, and sent back to Washington. For the men who were there, it was disconcerting. For the strategists sitting far out of reach, it was a riddle and maybe an opportunity. Antarctica was no longer just a frozen wilderness. Rather, it was a contested area in the shadowy struggle for global power, where science walks hand in hand with secrecy. And for this game, Admiral Byrd and his crew were American pieces on the global chessboard. Strange lights and broken compasses were only the beginning. Soon, the U.S. Navy would return with overwhelming force. Operation High Jump. In the winter of 1946, the United States launched what would become the largest Antarctic expedition in history. Officially, it was called Operation High Jump, a training exercise designed to test men and machines in extreme cold, map uncharted coastline, and practice resupply operations in hostile environments. That was the version given to the press. But for those who saw the operation up close, the scale alone suggested something far beyond scientific.